The Buffalo Sabres have drafted a lot over the last few years, and they drafted a lot again this year, and I think they did pretty good too. At 14th overall, the Buffalo Sabres start their draft class with Konsta Helenius, playing in Jukurit in Finland. Now, I've been on the record that I have not been as big a fan of Konsta Helenius, but this is around the range where I think he's a perfectly acceptable player to take. I had him ranked lower, but that's only because I just wonder how much upside there is in his game. But he is one of the best examples of a player in this year's draft who just has a really sound mind for the game, and whatever develops around that over the next few years will only make him better. He moves the puck well, he plays hard, he plays physical, he forechecks well, he's got a pretty good shot, he's got a bit of skill to him as well. I just wonder how much he's able to create in the NHL in a few years without some significant development. That said, a third-line center that's pretty good, that slots in behind maybe some of the more skilled offensive players they've drafted the last few years, sure, I can absolutely see it, and I think he'd be a pretty good person in that role. At 42nd, they drafted Adam Kleber, and this is a bit of a home run swing. I mean, I really like Adam Kleber. He's a big, hulking defenseman who skates pretty well for his size. I found him impressive at the Hlinka Gretzky tournament this season. I just think that he's very raw. There are moments where you see some really impressive offensive skill out of him and some daring confidence, and then he just kind of disappears and sits back and lets the game come to him and plays a basic, sound defensive style of hockey that maybe needs some work moving the puck a little bit, but the raw talent, when it comes out, it's great. And I think Kleber's an interesting pick at 42. I might have gone a different direction, but sure, I see the appeal in a guy like Adam Kleber, and I think he does offset, again, some of these more offensive-leaning players that are already in Buffalo's system and already on their NHL team. At 71st overall, they drafted Brody Zemer, another player I had ranked in my top 2 rounds, and I like Brody Zemer. Again, similar to Helenius, a very smart and dependable player that the talent around him needs to develop a little bit more to project. But I do think that he brings enough smarts and enough timing with his passing where he can overcome some of the limitations that he has. I think he's a really great complementary player. I mean, just go and watch him at the under-18s with guys like Teddy Stiga and James Haggins mostly driving the bus. He fit in perfectly with those guys and was really good in that tournament. So to see him drafted here, I'm pleasantly surprised. I do think he's a bit of a long shot for NHL time, but he's a very smart player, and I do really think that Buffalo thinks there's something interesting here, and I personally don't blame them. Cue Sam McGilligan, because at 108th overall, they drafted his boy, Luke Osborne, another player ranked in my top 2 rounds. I really like Luke Osborne. He's not there yet, but the growth in his game since last year playing 16U AAA to this season being a spare defenseman with Youngstown to being a top pair guy at times, that doesn't happen very often. And when you watch Luke Osborne, you can see why he's so valued and how he's come so far. He's positioned so well, so often, and he skates really well, getting around the ice effectively, cutting off gaps and closing things off really effectively. He has had a great level of success on puck retrievals and moving the puck in the defensive zone. It's not perfect, and there are some rough spots that I think he needs to work on. I think he takes on a lot on his own when he probably should be distributing the puck a little bit more than he does. But I do think there's also offensive tools here. He's got great footwork along the offensive blue line, a quick, hard wrist shot from the point that just didn't find the back of the net very often. And I think there's potential that if he's coached and encouraged to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more confident in a safer way, I think Osborne could be a really interesting player long term. He's a bit of a project, but a really good one with really good foundational skills that has had a really good trajectory over the last 12 months. At 123rd, they drafted Simon-Pierre Brunet, and this is a guy who I haven't seen a whole lot of. He played with Drummondville this year. He seems like a perfectly adequate defenseman in the QMJHL, and I don't mean that in a negative way. There's nothing really that stood out to me watching him, but he moved the puck decently well. He played with a bit of a physical edge here and there. He's a decent skater as well. He just brings a lot of stuff that is fine to good. And I think that's okay to bet on. They've done this before. They drafted players out of Drummondville, and Vsevolod Komarov, for example, has turned out to be a pretty decent defenseman at that level. So we'll see what happens with Brunet. I wasn't huge on him, but on 123rd, you were easily getting into the part where you just kind of picked who you liked, and they like him, so let's cross our fingers because there's something there with him, I'm just not sure what. At 172nd, they drafted Patrick Geary, a player who caught my eye a little bit here and there because he was playing with Artyom Levshinov here and there during the season. Geary's a player who does bring a physical edge to the game for sure. He loves to throw his weight around. He's got a decent set of feet under him. I think for a re-entry NCAA defenseman, he brought enough to the table where I could see him getting drafted, and at 172nd overall, you may as well take your swing. another season or two in college and you'll see what he can do in the AHL. He's the captain of the team for a reason. You can tell when he's on the ice that he is really just a guy who puts the team on his back, plays hard, plays physical, and I think that that has value. So we'll see what happens with Geary, but I was pleasantly intrigued by this pick as well. At 204th, they went to the Alps Hockey League and drafted Vasily Zelenov from the Red Bull Hockey Academy. And this is actually a player, believe it or not, that I have seen play this season because he was very, very productive on a team full of young players. And he played in a men's league, albeit a pretty low division men's league, and I didn't really see much in Zelenov, to be perfectly honest. It's a really hard league to analyze, the Alps League, especially with the context of the NHL Draft, but it's not a particularly strong league. I actually had the privilege of doing some work for an independent person who really needed some information about how European hockey is structured and the hierarchy of league quality, and the Alps Hockey League is pretty low. So scoring a lot there isn't really meaningful in my book, and I wasn't really blown away with what I was seeing in Zelenov. But the Red Bull Hockey Academy is a pretty decent academy with lots and lots of options for players to move up and down the hierarchy. So we'll see what happens with him. Again, you leave him overseas and who knows where he goes from here. Then at 219th, the Buffalo Sabres drafted a player who I was a little bit surprised was still available in Ryerson Leenders, a goaltender for the Mississauga Steelheads. Now, some goalie people I know were not the biggest fans of Leenders for one reason or another, but when you look at the deeper analytics behind his performances, he's been really, really good. He's faced a really heavy workload from scoring areas this year and turned away shots at a pretty good rate at 5-on-5. He outperforms his expected goals rate by a pretty sizable margin, more so than quite a few goaltenders drafted ahead of him. And at 219th overall, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that a goaltender slips all the way to the 7th round for one reason or another, and a team just goes, I don't know, let's bet on him. He stops pucks, and who knows? And they turn out to be decent. So maybe Buffalo's found some interesting talent here in Leenders. I would have been more than happy taking a swing on him at this point, so kudos to them. They might have ended up with something here. Some people aren't huge fans of him, but I don't know. From what I saw of him this year in my limited goaltending experience, I dug him, and I felt like he should have been drafted, so seeing him go undrafted would have been very surprising. So the Buffalo Sabres, similar to the Chicago Blackhawks, are going to get a 2A. I think overall their draft class looks just really solid. There's nothing that really jumps out at me as something spectacular or a massive steal. Maybe Ryerson Leenders as a 7th round pick becomes a good goaltender at some point, and sure, that would be a steal. But they just drafted a lot of really solid hockey players, and they all could turn into something that maybe isn't the most exciting product on the ice, but just very effective. Hellenius, Kleber, Zemer, Osborne, even the guys in the mid-rounds like Brunet and Geary, I saw things there where I kind of go, alright, we'll see where they're at in a little while, but sure. Maybe they could have aimed higher here or there, but I think that where they did aim makes sense. They've aimed high a whole bunch the last couple of seasons, and now they might have some guys they can round out their team with over time, or at least guys who could threaten for jobs like that in the future. We'll see where it goes. I think there are some interesting players in this draft class for them, and yeah, I think the Buffalo Sabres, considering what they had, did pretty well. That's it for the Buffalo Sabres, and if you liked the video, you can check our description box for our Fanatics affiliate link, where anything you buy in the store will give us a small kickback, or you can go to Scouching.ca, where a subscription gets you access to a private Discord server, data tables for drafted and undrafted prospects, as well as plenty of other fun toys you can check out on the site. So that's it for the Buffalo Sabres, and next we're going to have a look at the New York Islanders.